It was the sort of discovery that raised more questions than answers. On October 21st, 1977, a sheriff's deputy, driving along a seldom-used logging road in Humboldt County, Northern California, stumbled upon something that should not have been there. The red station wagon was parked at an odd angle, the kind of angle that made the deputy instinctively pause. Dust clung to the back window, thick and heavy as though it had been there for days. Leaves, dried and brown, gathered in clumps along the edges of the hood, pushed into corners by the restless winds that moved through the mountains. It was the kind of silence that felt oppressive, unnaturally still. There were no signs of life, no human footprints, no movement, just the abandoned car, alone in a vast sea of trees. The kind of place where time seemed to stand still. The vehicle was left like a ghost, an incomplete scene, almost as if it were waiting for something. The deputy's unease grew as he stepped closer. The vehicle was not just forgotten, it was utterly out of place. The surrounding forest seemed to swallow it, giving the impression that it had always been there. The road was forgotten too, twisted, overgrown, leading deep into nowhere. It was the type of place you did not just end up by accident. Whoever had parked there had meant to be there, or something had forced them to. By the time backup arrived, the deputy was already standing near the car, unsure of what to make of it. Inside, it was like any ordinary family vehicle. Jackets draped casually over the seats, a half-finished carton of milk in the cup holder, shoes and toys, everyday items that belonged to the family, or at least, it seemed so. But there was something haunting about the stillness of it. It was as though the people who owned these things had only just stepped away. But where were they? Why were their lives paused like this? The keys were still in the ignition, the engine soft but ticking as it cooled, the only sign that the car had been recently used. Yet, outside of the vehicle, there was no sign of movement. No footprints, no trace, no explanation, just an empty car standing at the edge of the wild, its story untold. No one knew it yet, but this was only the beginning of one of the strangest disappearances California had ever seen. A family, their car, and an eerie silence that would persist long after they were gone. In the remote hamlet of Honeydew, nestled within the rugged mountains of Humboldt County, the Stewart family lived a quiet, almost hidden life. Mary Elizabeth Stewart, a 32-year-old mother, had two young daughters, Jessie, just 2 years old, and Fanny, only 1. The Stewart family was not known for much beyond their isolation. Their home sat far from the nearest, tucked away off a forgotten mountain road. The land around them was vast, untouched by the chaos of the world, the wilderness pressing in on every side. Life, it seemed, was peaceful and contained within their own little world, far from the prying eyes of the outside. Mary's husband, Byron McGraw Stewart, worked their small homestead, but he was not exactly the picture of community involvement. He had a reputation for a hot temper, one that often made the few neighbors who lived nearby keep their distance. But the Stewarts were, for the most part, a family of few words, quietly coexisting with the earth and the animals that surrounded them. It was not the life that others might dream of, but to Mary it was enough. She loved her children, and she loved the solitude that came with their off-the-grid existence. The holidays of 1977 were fast approaching, and nothing seemed amiss. But in the background, a storm was quietly gathering, a storm that would tear apart the fabric of their family's life. For while the Stewarts' life seemed peaceful and untouched by modernity, the mystery that was about to unfold was one that no one in this quiet corner of Northern California would ever forget. Saturday, December 10th, 1977, began like any other ordinary day. The skies were overcast, the chill of winter settling over the mountains. Mary packed her 2 young daughters into the family's red Opel station wagon. She had errands to run in the nearby towns of Fortuna and Eureka, grocery shopping, picking up laundry, perhaps stopping by the repair shop to fix a broken television. It was a typical Saturday, the kind that many families across America experience, without a second thought. It should have been a day just like any other. Yet, it would become the last day the Stewart family would ever be seen. By 10:00 a.m., the red station wagon rolled away from the homestead. The dirt road wound ahead, disappearing into the fog and shadows of the Humboldt Hills. Mary had no reason to think this trip would be any different from the countless others before it. With 2 little ones in tow, it would likely be a long day, but nothing that would cause concern. She promised Byron they would be back by nightfall, groceries in hand and the errands completed. The simple rhythm of their life was about to be shattered. As the car disappeared from view, none of the neighbors or friends realized it would be the last time they would see Mary, Jessie, or Fanny. The day carried on, the usual small-town hum of daily, but by the evening there was a change in the air. Byron's anxiety grew when the red station wagon did not return home as expected. First, there were hopes that perhaps Mary had stopped somewhere, or that some car trouble had delayed their return. But as the hours passed, the dread began to seep in. The daylight faded under the canopy of trees, but the Stewart home remained eerily silent. There was no car pulling into the driveway, no laughter or voices filling the air, just the creeping uncertainty that something was not right. By 6:00 p.m., the sun had long since set, and Byron's worries deepened. As the night wore on, still no sign of Mary or the children. At first, there was the hope that they had simply stayed with someone for the night. Maybe a problem with the car had forced them to stop. But by the following morning, after no word, the worry turned to fear. Byron began asking around, calling neighbors, friends, anyone who might have seen them, but no one had. The routine trip to town had ended with nothing but unanswered questions. By the afternoon, Byron had become frantic, pacing the homestead, desperate for any word, any sign. It was only then, on December 13th, 3 days after the Stewarts had vanished, that Byron called the authorities. A missing persons report was filed with the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, but no one knew where to begin. They had no leads, no sign of the family anywhere. The trip to town, once so ordinary, had suddenly turned into a vast and terrifying mystery. What had happened? Why had they not returned? What could have caused the family to simply disappear without a trace? The sheriff's office immediately began investigating, and soon, local volunteers joined in. The search began on the winding, remote roads that led out of Honeydew, hoping to find a clue that could explain what had happened. The case was treated as one of concern, with foul play suspected from the outset. The following days saw search parties scouring the dense forests and rugged terrain of Humboldt County. Deputies, volunteers, even neighbors all joined the hunt, but nothing turned up. No car tracks, no signs of a struggle, just the eerie silence of the wilderness surrounding them. It was as if the Stewarts had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving no trace behind. December 10th, 1977 began like many others in Honeydew, a quiet, cold morning under the foggy canopy of redwood trees. As Mary packed up her young daughters, Jessie and Fanny, into their red station wagon, the ordinary rhythm of life continued without interruption. It was just a trip into town, nothing more than the usual errands that had become part of her routine. The car's tires crunched along the dirt roads, the air growing colder as they ventured further from the familiar comfort of their homestead. The plan was simple: drive into Fortuna or Eureka, run the necessary errands, buy groceries, pick up laundry, get the television fixed, and then, back home by nightfall. The world seemed small and contained. There was no reason to suspect that this would be the last time anyone saw Mary, Jessie, and Fanny. The day was supposed to end with mundane tasks finished, a warm meal at the end of it all, and a sense of normalcy restored. But as the hours slipped by and the family's absence stretched into the evening, the tone shifted. Byron waited in the quiet, growing uneasy as the sun dipped lower behind the hills. By nightfall, There was still no sign of the red station wagon winding its way back to the homestead. At first, Byron tried to comfort himself with rational explanations. Perhaps the car had broken down. Maybe they had stopped for an overnight visit with friends. It was not unusual for Mary to be delayed, but as the minutes turned into hours, doubt crept in. Byron's unease deepened. His thoughts turned darker as the night dragged on. He found himself pacing the living room, staring out into the shadows of the mountains, trying to convince himself that everything was fine. But the longer the wait stretched on, the more his instincts told him otherwise. There had been no phone call, no explanation, just silence. When the morning of December 11th arrived, the silence remained. Byron could no longer ignore the gnawing worry that something had gone horribly wrong. He called neighbors, asking if they had seen the family, but no one had. Mary had told him they would be back by dark, but now, 2 full days later, there was still no sign. As the hours passed, Byron's hope began to fade into dread. Something had happened, and he could not figure out what. The idea that Mary, Jessie, and Fanny could be lost or worse seemed to grow with every unanswered minute. By December 13th, 3 days after they had left, Byron knew he could not wait any longer. The phone call to the authorities was made, and a missing persons report was filed. The small town, once untouched by the noise of the outside world, suddenly buzzed with anxiety. In the days that followed, search teams formed. Volunteers, law enforcement, and locals set out into the wilderness, retracing the family's steps, hoping for a sign, any clue that could explain what had happened to them. The roads they had traveled became the focus of intense scrutiny, but the more they searched, the more everything seemed to slip through their fingers. The local sheriff's office, along with community members, scoured the highways and back roads, including remote paths and dense forests where no one should have been able to go unnoticed. They combed through the Humboldt County mountains and the redwood groves, looking for any trace of Mary, Jessie, Fanny, or the red station wagon. But no matter how far they searched, the family seemed to have vanished entirely. No one had seen them after they left, and there was no sign of struggle anywhere along the route. It was as if they had simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but an empty home and unanswered questions. The silence of the wilderness, broken only by the whispers of the wind through the trees, seemed to mock their efforts. With no car tracks, no broken glass, no traces of any kind, it was as though the Stewart family had never existed at all. The only evidence of their lives was a few items left behind: groceries, clothing, and the faint echoes of a life interrupted. But where were the Stewarts? Why had they vanished without a trace? And where had they gone? These questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the community rallied together in the face of a mystery that refused to be solved. The search would continue, but the truth remained elusive. As the search for the missing Stewart family began in earnest, it quickly became clear that this would be no ordinary investigation. The authorities and local volunteers formed search teams, spreading out across the rough terrain of Humboldt County in a desperate attempt to find any trace of Mary, Jessie, and Fanny. The area was vast and treacherous, filled with dense forests, steep slopes, and winding roads that could swallow anyone who was not paying attention. Despite the daunting landscape, the search parties pressed on, driven by the hope that they could solve this mystery. For days, teams of deputies, forest rangers, and neighbors scoured the roads and paths that Mary would have traveled, carefully searching for any clue that could explain the family's disappearance. Vehicles moved along the highways, while mounted teams and even horseback riders combed through the deep woods. Volunteers ventured into the wild, bravely navigating the thick undergrowth, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything that could lead them to the missing family. They checked remote clearings, back roads, and old logging trails, each area more desolate than the last, but no sign of the Stewarts was found. The task was made even more difficult by the weather. The cold winter rains began to fall, soaking the ground and making it harder to track anything. The teams pressed on, undeterred, but as the days wore on, the frustration mounted. They found no sign of the car, no broken branches, no displaced dirt, no footprints leading off the road. It was as if Mary, Jessie, and Fanny had simply vanished into the fog that clung to the earth. Nothing, no evidence, no explanation. As the search extended into neighboring areas, the sense of dread among the locals grew. This was not the first time people had gone missing in these mountains, but the circumstances surrounding the Stewart family's disappearance felt different. The absence of any clues, no trace of the family car, no signs of a struggle, no belongings left behind left investigators with more questions than answers. Was there something more sinister at play? Could the family have been taken? Or had they somehow disappeared on their own accord? The community began to fear the worst. The idea that something had happened to them, something violent or unexpected, lingered in the air. Even as law enforcement spread word to neighboring counties and the state, there was still no sign of the missing family. The frustration of not knowing grew, and as the days turned into weeks, people began to accept the unsettling truth. The Stewarts had seemingly vanished without a trace, leaving only the eerie quiet of the forest behind. In the absence of physical evidence, the community's imagination began to run wild. Some speculated that the family had fallen victim to a random crime, while others whispered about darker possibilities. It was as if the forest itself had claimed them. Was there an element of foul play involved, or was this something even more mysterious? In the face of mounting pressure, the search continued, but still, there was nothing. No breakthroughs, no new clues. The case began to feel like a ghost story, a chilling enigma that would remain unresolved for an indefinite time. And yet, in the back of everyone's mind, there was a gnawing sense that the answer was out there, waiting to be uncovered. If only they could find it. The silence of the wilderness pressed in on all sides, mocking their efforts. No one could say for sure what had happened to the Stewarts, but one thing was certain. The forest had swallowed them whole, and the questions about their fate would haunt Humboldt County for years to come. Over a month passed, and hope began to wane. It was mid-January 1978, when the breakthrough came not from a detective, but from a group of surveyors working on an unused logging road. As they navigated a desolate path, roughly 1.5 miles from the Stewart homestead, their eyes caught something unusual among the towering ferns and thick underbrush. The familiar red Opel station wagon, now caked in mud and hidden beneath the shadows of the trees, sat abandoned and eerily still. It was like finding an old artifact in the middle of the wilderness, a relic from a time that seemed distant and disconnected from the present. The moment they spotted the car, the atmosphere shifted. The mystery, which had been drifting aimlessly through weeks of unanswered questions, suddenly jolted back to life. The surveyors reported their find, and soon after, law enforcement and investigators arrived on the scene. But the sight of the car only deepened the confusion. The vehicle was clearly Mary's, a red station wagon, with no obvious signs of a crash or damage, yet it sat there, as if it had been deliberately hidden, tucked away in a place that Mary would never have driven on a routine trip to town. The car's condition suggested that it had been there for some time, abandoned but not entirely neglected. The groceries inside had spoiled, the bread and canned goods now cold and unusable. A basket of laundry sat in the back seat, the clothes neatly folded, though now damp from the elements. The small everyday items that Mary had planned to pick up during her trip, groceries, laundry, and a television to be repaired, were still inside the car, as though the errand had been interrupted. The seemingly mundane items were now part of a puzzle that refused to come together. Among the strange discoveries, one detail stood out above the rest: the portable television. It was in working order, despite the fact that no one in the area remembered servicing it. A chilling possibility arose: someone had fixed it, but no repair shop could recall ever having worked on it, and Mary had never mentioned visiting one. How had the television been repaired? Had Mary or the family encountered someone, or was there a mysterious place they visited along their route that no one knew about? This one detail set ripples through the investigation, suggesting that something far more complicated had transpired during the Stewarts' ill-fated trip. The car itself, however, was in a state of disrepair. The gas line had been severed, or perhaps it had broken, rendering the vehicle inoperable. Whether this was a deliberate act or an accident remained unclear. What was certain was that the car had run out of fuel, leaving it stranded in a desolate spot on an unused logging road. The damage to the gas line seemed to suggest that the vehicle had been intentionally incapacitated, but the reason for this action was still unknown. Despite the abundance of personal items left inside, there were no signs of a struggle. No broken glass, no bloodstains, no footprints around the vehicle. No evidence that the family had been forced from the car or taken against their will. The scene was oddly undisturbed, almost as if the car had simply been left behind, the family disappearing into the woods without a trace. The unsettling silence of the forest seemed to engulf the vehicle, leaving only more questions in its wake. Perhaps the most chilling discovery was the presence of Mary's purse and cash. Both were found inside the car, untouched and left behind as if she had simply stepped away. It was a strange detail. Why would she leave her money and personal belongings behind if she had walked away on her own? Or if she had been abducted? The absence of any signs of violence only deepened the mystery, leaving investigators to wonder whether the family had been forced into the woods or whether they had willingly left their car and disappeared into the vast expanse of the forest. As law enforcement carefully cataloged the scene, they found themselves with more questions than answers. The car, so ordinary in its appearance, had become an eerie symbol of a journey that had abruptly ended, its passengers vanishing as though swallowed whole by the wilderness. No one knew how or why the family had ended up there, and the absence of any further clues made the mystery even more impenetrable. What had happened between the moment they left their home and the moment the car was found? Where had the Stewarts gone? And why had they left everything behind, as if they had walked into thin air? As the investigation continued, the pieces of the puzzle grew more scattered, and the story of the missing family seemed to slip further out of reach. The discovery of the car, though significant, had done little to provide the answers everyone had been hoping for. In fact, it had only intensified the sense of unease that had been building since the family's disappearance. The discovery of the abandoned station wagon marked a turning point in the investigation, but it also led to more questions than answers. What had happened to Mary, Jessie, and Fanny? The vehicle, left untouched with groceries and laundry inside, suggested that the Stewarts had not intended to vanish. They had not been in a rush. They had not been in any form of distress. Yet, they were gone. Theories about what could have happened to them started to form, but with no clear evidence to support any one theory. Every possibility felt equally plausible. As the investigation deepened, suspicion began to fall on Byron Stewart, Mary's husband. Byron was a known figure in the area. He was not exactly well liked, and his temper was infamous. Neighbors often described him as violent and erratic, prone to outbursts and unpredictable behavior. The Stewarts had kept to themselves for the most part, but it was clear that Mary and Byron's relationship had its tensions. His history with anger, combined with the strange circumstances surrounding the disappearance, made him an obvious person of interest. Byron's actions after his family's disappearance did little to alleviate suspicion. Rather than helping with the search efforts, he retreated into a world of bizarre claims and erratic behavior. He told anyone who would listen that he believed his wife and daughters had been abducted by extraterrestrials. This outlandish theory only served to fuel the growing doubt about his innocence. Was Byron trying to divert attention away from himself, or was he genuinely deluded? Some in the community began to wonder if his strange behavior was an indication of guilt, as if he were attempting to cover up something darker. The FBI and local authorities, after looking into Byron's history, began to consider the possibility that he might have been involved in his family's disappearance. His anger, coupled with the mysterious nature of the event, made him the prime suspect. However, there was no hard evidence to connect him to any crime. The case was clouded with ambiguity. Byron's bizarre theories and actions only muddied the waters further. But it was clear that, if he was guilty, he was not going to make it easy for investigators to find the truth. Over the years, law enforcement revisited the case several times, but each time, they hit a wall. With no bodies, no clear motive, and no signs of foul play, they were left grasping at straws. Was there a darker, hidden motive behind the family's disappearance? Was Byron the one responsible? Or had something else occurred that was even more unfathomable? As investigators dug into the Stewarts' lives, they began to entertain other possibilities. Could Mary have orchestrated the disappearance herself? The idea that she may have staged the entire event, disappearing intentionally to escape from something, whether a personal crisis, an abusive marriage, or some other hidden aspect of her life, was a theory that grew in traction. Perhaps the family's trip to town had been a cover for something far more deliberate. Maybe Mary, in an attempt to escape her life and start anew, had set the scene perfectly, leaving behind clues that pointed to nothing more than a normal trip. The idea that she had arranged everything, down to the untouched groceries and laundry, suggested an elaborate plan, carefully crafted to look like an ordinary day. But the theory of voluntary disappearance raised even more unsettling questions. If Mary had planned her own escape, what had driven her to leave behind her family and her life? Was there a secret tragedy hidden beneath the surface of the Stewart family's seemingly quiet existence? If Mary had left on her own, then she had done so with a quiet resolve, leaving behind her husband and daughters without a word. But why? And how had she managed to disappear so completely, without leaving behind a single trace? On the other hand, there was the theory that the family had met with foul play not by Byron, but by someone else. The idea that the Stewarts had been taken off the road by a third party, someone who had been watching and waiting, was a chilling possibility. Perhaps Mary and the girls had encountered someone on their trip to town, a repairman, a stranger on the road, or someone else who had been lurking in the wilderness, waiting for the right moment to strike. The fact that Mary had mentioned a visit to the repair shop before they disappeared added a layer of suspicion to this theory. What if the repair shop had been a ruse? What if the family had been lured away from the safety of their route by someone who intended them harm? Then, there was the most troubling theory of all, that the Stewarts had been victims of a targeted, calculated abduction. Someone who knew them, or perhaps even someone who had been stalking them, might have waited for the right moment to take them. The fact that the family had been found with their car abandoned, but no signs of struggle or violence, made it feel deliberate, like a scene set, up to look like a normal day, but hiding something much darker beneath the surface. Theories swirled, but none of them provided any answers. The disappearance remained just that, a disappearance. And as the years wore on, the case grew colder. Byron's strange behavior only made the mystery more complex, and as the family's story faded into the annals of unsolved cases, the questions persisted. Was Mary guilty of orchestrating her own escape? Was Byron responsible for something far more sinister? Or had they simply vanished into the forest, the victim of something incomprehensible and beyond explanation? For decades, the mystery of the Stewart family remained unsolved, a dark thread in the history of Humboldt County that refused to be pulled loose. Despite the growing pile of theories and suspects, no one could answer the haunting question at the center of it all: what happened to the Stewarts? Decades passed, but the mystery of the Stewart family's disappearance refused to fade into obscurity. In 2009, over 30 years after the family's vanishing, the Humboldt County District Attorney's Office decided to revisit the case. New leads, they claimed, warranted a fresh look into the troubling disappearance. This was an attempt to breathe new life into an investigation that had long since stagnated, to unearth a fresh angle or breakthrough. that could finally provide the answers everyone had been yearning for. Despite this renewed effort, however, the case would remain as elusive as ever, haunting the memories of those who remembered the Stewarts and their vanished lives. A team of investigators was assembled, and once again, witnesses were re-interviewed. The roads, the paths, and the forest that had once been scoured were combed through again, with new forensic techniques and modern investigative methods applied. Yet even with advanced technology and years of hindsight, the discovery of the Stewart family's fate remained as opaque as it had been in the 1970s. The forest around Honeydew, once so silent in the face of their disappearance, was re-examined, but it remained steadfast in its refusal to give up the truth. No remains, no physical evidence, no sign of what had truly happened. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed the Stewarts whole, locking away any trace of them in a vault of silence. The fact that the primary suspect, Byron Stewart, had passed away in 1996 only deepened the mystery. Was there something he knew? Did he play a role in the disappearance of his family? Even in the years after his death, his actions, the bizarre claims, the violent reputation, the strange theories he espoused, kept his name linked to the case. There was no closure with him, no final confession, no revelation that could shed light on the dark corner of the Stewarts' lives. He took whatever secrets he might have held with him to his grave. Over the years, the theories about what happened to Mary, Jessie, and Fanny have evolved, but none have proven definitive. Some believe Mary orchestrated the entire disappearance, fleeing from her life with Byron, perhaps in search of freedom or a new beginning. Others are convinced that Byron's erratic behavior was the key, that something happened in the heat of a violent argument, or that he lost control and something tragic occurred. There is still the theory of abduction, whether by a stranger or even by someone who had been watching the family for months. The possibility that the family met with foul play, a premeditated act of violence, has not been ruled out. Perhaps the most unsettling theory is the one that has given rise to endless speculation in true crime forums and documentaries. The idea that the Stewarts were taken by something far beyond the realm of human explanation. Some have entertained the possibility of alien abduction, a theory first proposed by Byron in his later years. His strange statements about extraterrestrials, though dismissed by many, linger in the corners of the case, adding to the growing list of unanswered questions. Could it be that something otherworldly was at play? Could the Stewarts, for reasons unknown, have been chosen to disappear, taken from their lives in a way that defies logic? It is a theory that has held sway in the minds of those captivated by the bizarre, the unexplained. But no one has been able to prove anything. The question remains at the heart of the mystery. Why did they vanish? The story of the Stewart family has grown into an urban legend in Humboldt County, a chilling tale that echoes through the generations. Those who remember them can still feel the weight of the unanswered questions hanging in the air. Every so often, new tips or rumors would surface, promising new information. But each time, they faded as quickly as they came. The family was gone, and no amount of searching, no amount of speculation could bring them back. The only thing left was the silence, the profound, unnerving silence that surrounded their disappearance. A silence that has only grown deeper over time. As the years go on, the Stewart family's case remains one of California's most haunting mysteries. It stands as a stark reminder of how quickly ordinary lives can be ripped apart by the unknown, how easily a normal day can turn into a nightmare. It is a case that has everything: an idyllic family, a tranquil rural life, a sudden disappearance, and a host of strange and unexplainable clues. But above all, it is a case that leaves one lingering, terrifying thought. What if the truth is something far more sinister than we could ever imagine? The Stewart family's fate is still uncertain, their story incomplete, and until new evidence surfaces, or someone with knowledge speaks out, the mystery of what happened to Mary, Jessie, and Fanny Stewart will remain unsolved, a haunting enigma that time has not erased.